So welcome back to everybody who just joined us again. It's my pleasure to introduce our invited speaker, distinguished Professor Alexandra Aikhenvald. We call you Sasa. Sasa is a distinguished professor, Australian Laureate Fellow, and Director of Language and Culture Research Center at James Cook University. Sasa is a major authority in languages of Arawak family in the Amazonian area in Brazil, and also working on Papuan languages. Sasa is the author and editor of a long list of books and papers across different fields in linguistics. I just mentioned a couple of the books Sasa here. In the interest of time, so Oxford Handbook of Evidentiality, and Cambridge Handbook of Linguistic Topology, Classifiers, for example. Okay, so today Sasa is going to give an overview, just 5 minutes or so, for the languages of well-being. A few from the Pacific, the full recording has been uploaded online. So if you have any questions later on or want to view that recording, please do so later on, or must be some of you already watched the video. So to begin the discussion today, I invite Sasa to give an overview of the points of the talk. Okay, over to you, Sasa.
Thanks, Juan. Thanks for having me here and for everything you've done. So the languages of well-being, a view from the Pacific. The main question is, every language has a way of talking about disease and well-being, recovery, and so on. But the question is, how does language, more specifically grammatical means employed, reflect what people think, about diseases, how they conceptualize and perceive it, and also its cure, prevention, and consequences. So my sort of star quote here is from Aikhenvald, whom you all know. Encoded in the semantics of grammar, we find cultural values, ideas, and clues about what actually lies behind these structures. So what I did in this talk is offer a brief taxonomy of grammatical ways of saying things and means employed in the languages of the world, focus on the languages of the Pacific. As Juan just said, well, what languages I focused on were, of course, languages of New Guinea, mostly Papuan languages, just because it's where part of my heart lies. The other part lies in South America. So what sort of schema have we discovered? The motion schema, disease comes to me. Possession schema, I have a cold, or I am with cold. Acquisition schema with agentive suffer, I caught a cold, so I'm sort of agentive. Or the acquisition schema with agentive disease, a cold caught me. This is something incredibly common in the Pacific. So these are the sort of most striking ones, probably the most frequent ones. And there are a number of special features of these schemas that show you that they are different from superficially similar grammatical constructions, which are used for something else. That is, for instance, if I have a cold, it's different from when I have a house or a sister, or when a cold hits me, it's actually or a cold catches me. It is not quite the same subject type thing as when a, say, tiger in the Amazon catches me. And when a toothache bites me, which is the case in Karawari from Papua New Guinea, actually in Dirbal from Australia, it's absolutely different from when a mosquito bites me, because the properties are not the same. The question why is something that comes up. What are the motivations for the use of grammatical schemas? Can we discover or uncover why some schemas are used, and also then maybe translate them into traditional ways of talking about disease and healing? So in all societies, the disease is, of course, a disturbance to the order of things. It's normal for everyone. You don't even have to go to the Pacific, not even on Zoom. In many indigenous societies, especially Pacific and New Guinea, the emergence of disease is something to do with social imbalance or imbalance created by a breach of custom or someone. And the disease acquires its own agency or there is another agency behind it. So a disease doesn't come up by itself. There is a hidden agency, and this hidden agency can be linked to the shamanic attacks or the dreaded sangum. Actually, I'm afraid of pronouncing this term, as it is not really talked about. It's a malevolent magic infamous throughout the Pacific region and now percolating throughout the whole of Papua New Guinea. We appear to be facing an instance of an iconic motivation for the acquisition schema with agentive disease to express the agency and an affliction, the force behind it. So when a disease catches you in many languages of Papua New Guinea, well, there is a spirit or something, some sort of entity behind it. And in my talk, if you remember listening to it, I call it the conspiracy of silence. You do not really say who it is because it's dangerous to invoke a name. Now, one thing that really interests me, and as we go, it interests me more and more. What about when new afflictions happen? We all know that new health hazards bring about new ways of saying things. So what's happening to the Australian English? We have heaps of new words. I mean, quarantine, so quarantine times. If any of you drink alcohol, then you have quarantini for martini drunk during the quarantines. People who don't think anything of COVID-19 are COVIDians. Now, one of the words of the year recognized by the Oxford English Dictionary is staycation. It's a vacation when you stay at home. So all sorts of new things. Or you can redeploy old ways of saying things. Again, my favorite one comes from Brazil, because the virus, COVID-19, is talked about in the same way as corruption. It sort of circles you, engulfs you. Now, what happens in the languages of the Pacific? And that's a question which I maybe throw over to you, because it's very interesting how, well, whether you have new patterns or maybe some old patterns are being used. And I will just to sort of finish, throw you back into the Pacific area of Papua New Guinea, Manambo, which is a group of about 3,000 people. They have had, thank goodness, no incidents of COVID-19, but people live in Mosby and they have had these incidents. So somebody said to me, 27, Mosby, COVID-19 somo new takviand, Klimavi. What they said, COVID-19 affected or hit many people in Mosby. Here it hasn't hit. And so why COVID-19 hits, strikes? It's not the only thing to strike. There is a very interesting spirit, which, well, I mean, all the female audience probably should, me included, close our eyes. It's a type of spirit that women cannot see unless, if they do so, it strikes them. So does the mosquito. It's the world capital of mosquitoes, as you know, the Pacific. But not just mosquito. It's a mosquito as a cover-up for black magic, because a normal mosquito bites. It's his job. And the wind strikes you. So it looks like COVID-19 has acquired its own independent agency. We are in the process of developing new languages, new way of saying things as we go, as new outbreaks threaten us. And yeah, just at the end, I put up a picture of this mosquito land where you have two types of mosquitoes. One type of mosquito bites you, and then God forbid, the other type of mosquito is a cover-up for the agentive disease that actually stands behind one of the schemas. So over to you. That was just very short summary.
Okay, thank you, Sasa. Do people have any questions to start the discussion? Okay, if not, so I can just start the discussion. Sasa, so it's interesting to see you start with these schemas, okay? So you talk about different schemas, about motion. I think that's very common in my language, for example, Balinese and Indonesian. So the disease come to you just like English, and if you for example, recover the disease, leave from you. So it seems your body is a container, and you know you have this motion schema, and also other schemas that you have identified. So I just want to check with you, when you talk about languages of well-being. So are you talking about the specific schemas that, really specific for health and well-being, or talking about disease? But you mentioned this when, I remember that you talk about, for example, with the word bite, even though you have this transitive, it doesn't really, when you talk about disease, it's not really something like normal transitive bite, because you cannot pacify, for example. Is that, so the idea is, true, you have different schemas, general schemas, but then the specific things about talking about diseases that, you make use of existing schema, but there is a constraint on the possible normal, perhaps, for example, alternation. Is that the idea? That am I correct in understanding of your idea of two things here? One is general schemas in language of different kinds, and two, languages of well-being, so a specific construction for well-being.
Yes, I mean both. Basically, thank you for your question. Well, it appears based on these kind of a few hundred languages looked at, that they employ a set of about, I'd say 10, maybe so far about 10 schemas. And well, there is the motion schema, which is like disease comes to me, like in one of the Amazonian languages, that, or in Balinese, Indonesian, or disease leaves me when I'm okay. And in every case where we have the information, it appears that this schema has only superficial similarity to say another motion event. Basically, in the case of motion schema, it's not really a motion event. So, for instance, in those languages which use the motions that I have sort of looked at the grammar in depth, they use motion event to talk about the disease. I think it's also a few oceanic languages like Ebola. Yeah, it is a verb to come, but it doesn't do the full range of things that you expect a motion verb to do. For instance, it does not really take place in serial verb constructions. So it's only one verb on its own. It stands apart from other uses of motion verbs, because normally motion verbs are just serialized very easily. And it's actually great, thank you, for mentioning this idea of a body being a container for disease, because it's a separate scheme which I didn't put in my, include in my talk, because the examples, the good examples, like really sort of convincing examples, I have only come from South America. It's like I'm inside the disease, but being inside the disease is not the same as being inside the house, because there is a whole paradigm, like inside the house, outside the house, and various other locational. Inside the disease, it's almost like a fixed expression. And so it looks like languages co-opt part of this sort of span of uses of a particular construction or a particular verb maybe, and its possibilities, directing it towards disease. Now, we're a little bit pessimistic here. We're talking just about disease, but in actual fact, talking about well-being allows us to include the whole trajectory of what disease involves. You have the onset of disease. Very interestingly, this is where the motion schema is very, very common. Then you get the disease set in, container schema or possession schema comes in here. But then in a sort of, say, optimistic scenario, a person recovers. And this is again where we might get the motion schema. And at the end, the person is well. And then we get this kind of state of schema or kind of predicative schema. Now, possession schema for the disease having set in is perhaps the most interesting, because there is actually quite a lot of variability. You can have something like just a sort of, verb to have, okay, like in English, but then the verb to have as in I have a cough. As I said, behave differently from verb to have in terms of when it's used for possession and kinship relationship and some other functions that possessive verbs do. Now, in many Papua New Guinea languages, possession is expressed with accompaniment. So in Karawari, in Schemas, you say, I am with a disease. And again, it's a possessive structure, but well, you don't really get it from the Schemas grammar, but I talked to the author of the Karawari dictionary, Boru Telban, and it appears from what he says, that I am with disease is still has a different grammatical possibilities from something like I'm with an older sister, meaning I have an older sister. So again, we do have this tiny subset. And also another thing about this accompaniment schema, which I learned from Boru Telban's anthropological work. So it's really a multidisciplinary project, is that the body, the person is seen as a container in a very physical way, because the way of treating a disease is say, they call them medicine men, and South America we probably will call them shamans, but a medicine man will come, or a specialist, saying, okay, you such and such are with a disease, I will take it out of you, and he takes physical objects out of it. So the reenactment of the healing process actually iconically correlates with the way it is being spoken about. So you do get, well, this is where the conceptualization, I think, comes in.
Okay. Any other question or follow up that comment? Yep, Nara.
Yes, Sasha, it's very, very interesting. You know, I'm a historian, so it's kind of, for me, an eye-opening kind of session, you know, talking about the language part and grammatical part of this kind of concepts relating to disease and well-being. So I've been learning a lot, and I'm sort of particularly intrigued by your thinking of, you know, analyzing this concept from a grammatical point of view, right? And so I'm a Mongolian speaker, and while you were talking and while listening to your talk, I was thinking about, okay, how I would say in Mongolian, right? And then I realized that actually in Mongolian is actually the body, you know, is active, the, you know, verb in a way, the disease or when you get sick. It is the body, say, you know, fever, right? So the body is feverish, yeah? And then the body so sickens, yeah? So it's very much active within the body, even though the Mongolian tradition, you know, as you may know, there has got a very strong shamanic and Buddhist element, which thinks that, you know, getting sick from the shamanistic point of view, because something else actually bad spirit got into you and disturbing you, so that's why you get sick, right? And then from the Buddhist point of view, Tibetan Buddhist point of view is that, you know, because you has got imbalance in your body, so there's three humors, it's not in balance, yeah, or the five elements in your body is not well balanced, so that's why you get sick, right? So in that way, I was thinking, you know, because this is from the Buddhist medical point of view, because within your body, the balance is not correct, not very well balanced, perfect balance, so that's why you get sick. So that might be that influence the Mongolian kind of expression of disease. So I was thinking about that, and I thought it's fascinating. And then as when you say, you know, I'm with disease, yeah, with illness, in Mongolian there is also a term, not I'm with. It's actually with disease. It's not I'm with disease, it's with disease. There's no, very often there is no subject, right? In Mongolian, they don't use subjects like Italian, so very often they skip the subject. So it is always kind of third person, or you can say in a way, so with disease or the body feverish or body sickens, that kind of thing. So I thought that it might be a kind of interesting example for your
Nara, it's absolutely fascinating, because basically, I must confess that the whole project has so far been concentrated on the languages of the tropics. And we did, well, of course, you look at Japanese, we have a student of Hmong here, and so those things you do. But, well, I confess I haven't looked at Mongolian, but I used to have a few colleagues who worked on Mongolian many years ago. And it's type of information that has to come from people like you who really know. But it is really interesting that bodily imbalance is, maybe one can think of it, I'm just fantasizing, as being reflected in the fact that you talk about the state of the body and not the agency of the sufferer themselves, because it's sort of, you have this kind of stepping back, a little bit of alienation of the sufferer, because it's the bodily imbalance that actually causes the symptoms. Now, in many ways, maybe, well, in the shamanic tradition, it is just dangerous to talk about the agency behind the disease, and that may be hidden behind the fact that people don't say, well, the shaman hit me or the disease hit me. You just say, well, the body is sick. And then it's, of course, understood that, look, it is sick and we know why, but let's not mention this entity, lest it hits us really seriously. So it could be part of that sort of conspiracy of silence against overusing terms for diseases, which of course you do find in most civilizations, and also in European civilization. There is this great work by Kate Burridge and Reka Benches on taboo in talking about disease and death. And of course, you have all these circumlocutions. There are certain things you don't say directly. So maybe the fact that you are sort of shifting the disease onto the body is a way of, you know, basically verbal protection, lest it really wakes up and affects you, if it makes sense.
Oh yeah. I do. Yeah, but I was thinking, you know, at least from my childhood, and when the elderly people talked about when they invited kind of shamanic people, they do actually, in Mongolian shamanism at least, they do tell at least to the family that what is wrong, actually, what kind of spirit is actually interfering in a way, or possessed by what kind of spirits. So they are not very silent in that sense.
Well, but that's their job, because they're healers, so they have to basically pinpoint who did it or which spirit did it. But another thing that's absolutely fascinating, and I don't think it has been studied enough, is the interaction between different sort of layers of conceptualization. Like in Mongolia, thank goodness, you still have shamanic religion, and you have the Buddhism, how can I say, the Buddhism layer, and of course they're different.
The Buddhist layer, yeah.
Yeah, you sort of have almost two sides of a coin, but how do they marry together, and how the languages change as well, accommodating to change in religion and change in approach. And we kind of think, we know that, or at least something, correct me if you think otherwise, languages tend to be a little bit more conservative than sort of cultures or maybe religion, because people may change religion in a generation or two, but for linguistic structures to change, it probably takes a bit longer. And so again, through language, we may reconstruct this sort of original approach. Having said that, if you remember from my talk, it is absolutely amazing how major languages really encroach on the minor languages. And all over the Pacific area, for instance, people just say, I caught a disease. And why do they say that? Because this is what they see in the health kind of brochures, which are written in the local lingua franca Tokpisin. So, but on the other hand, we know that superficially the structures may change, but we don't really know whether the approach will change. So even people who are say devoted Buddhists, they probably still have shamanic beliefs entrenched in them, because it's their own. It's something you grew up with.
Yes. So yes, you are definitely right. And I can see, you know, in Inner Mongolia, where actually the dominant language is Chinese, even though people speak Mongolian, but I can see, you know, the terms, basically a direct translation from Chinese, you know, so that has been affecting the language structure and grammar as well. So for instance, you know, as you mentioned in Chinese, as you know, very often say that you get disease, yeah, so you get it. And in recent years, I can see, you know, some Mongol written language is using that kind of concept as well. So yeah.
What part of Mongolia are you from?
I'm from Inner Mongolia, so the Chinese part. So that's why I can talk about the both side.
Yes, yes. That's wonderful, because the other side, I mean, the sort of the side that belongs to places where much of shamanism was basically eradicated by the Soviet regime, maybe you'll find something else. But again, I only have one colleague who appears to be working on it, but she's working on Tuvan, Elizabeta Raganin, so I need to talk to her about it.
Oh, Tuva. Oh, okay, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So we are 5 minutes or even 6 minutes over the limit. But anyway, it's interesting topic. But just one quick question. This is the big question, perhaps, you know, the question of why. So you talk about this, you know, grammar, language specific grammar or grammar topology, blah, 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 blah. And then you have disease. So why is it the case that talking about disease or pandemic or well-being then imposes certain constraint on the schema?
Well, because I think, well, to answer this question very briefly, because it is a very vital and important issue, and this is how sort of society and human necessity encroaches upon grammar. So grammar is a slave of necessity. You really need to express these incredibly important concepts: the imbalance, the disease, the recovery, the cure. And grammatical structures are kind of twisted and deployed to serve them. I think that's the motivation. But then the motivation can be deeper, like the spirits behind it, or some other hidden agency, or body conceived as a container of something beyond human perception. So again, then we go into a deeper sort of waters.
Okay, interesting. So there are, you know, kind of non-linguistic variables creeping into certain semantically relevant grammar or something like that. That's very interesting.
More or less, you know, like in certain areas of grammar,
yes,
you will just see the geographical habitat. Look at the picture in front of you. There's all mountains and rivers.
yes.
And most of the languages do have demonstratives: up river, down river, yes. Across up mountain, down mountain.
Yes.
And that's a kind of primitive example. And with disease, yes. Again, everyone has a disease, so well, not necessarily. It has to talk about well-being. And this necessity encroaches and co-opts specific grammatical structures. Except here we are, it's maybe very difficult for us to uncover because of different layers of influence, like what Nara said. There's perhaps in one language you may get Chinese influence, you may get maybe, who knows, English, you may get your own. And here it's almost like peeling an onion and trying to get to the core. And our eyes get watery because it's difficult.
Okay, good. We need to invite you for another talk, Sasa, I think, to talk a bit more.
Well, I'd love to. And let's see, you know,
yes.
First time in the history of the Federation, there is a direct flight from Canberra to Cairns, so you can come to Cairns.
Okay, with that note, I think, you know, we thank you, Sasa, for your, you know, stimulating discussion, and the topic is really interesting.
Thanks so much, Nara, and thanks for what you said. It's really very close to my heart. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you. And with this, and then we just finish today. And thank you again. Hope that see you again. And tomorrow.
Yes, and see you again, and have a nice, have a nice time. And we'll see each other again. Yes, thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Sasha.
Bye.
Bye-bye.